Suikoden 2 is a banger that brings one of the most brutal villains in video game history to the table with Luca Blight. Luca is a maniac that only desires death and destruction, and carries an immense amount of charisma to steal the scene every time he's on screen. The game also just got an HD remaster which looks fantastic, so check it out, especially if you've never played the original. Luca was born to Agares and Sarah Blight as a member of the Highland royal family. The game itself only gives us one detail about his backstory, although this point is expanded upon quite a bit in the short story Crisis Point. When he was 10, he traveled with his family to a ceremony in Meuse, and on their return to Lurenui, their carriage was attacked by some thieves. His mother woke him up from a nap to warn him of the attack, and urged him to escape while she drew their attention. She pushed him out of the carriage and he hid under a blanket, listening to the screams of men and women coming from the carriage. When he thinks he hears his mother calling for help, he tries to convince himself to stand up and fight the thieves, but he was too paralyzed by fear and remained where he was until help arrived. The next day, Luca was found near the foot of a tree by some Highland guards and brought back to the capital. He was greeted by his father, who seemed to be bare of any injuries or ruffled clothing, as if he wasn't even there at the attack. He asks about his mother, and is told that she was found slightly before him, without any injuries but in great shock and needed time to rest on her own. Agares fled the scene for two reasons. One, to call for help, and two, he was king of Highland. He couldn't afford to die. Luca doesn't accept this answer, and calls his father a coward, claiming that he didn't care what happened to his wife or son, and in this moment, Luca lost all respect for Agares. Sarah would never be the same after the attack, and was kept hidden away for the rest of her life. Luca would keep trying to pry about what happened to his mother, but the only information he was ever able to get from anyone was that his mother was soiled in the incident. Being separated was particularly hard on Luca, as there were only two people in his life that he felt comfortable opening up to: his mother and his caretaker Mariel. To make things worse, shortly after the attack, Mariel was sent back to her hometown, although we'll see where she really went in a little bit. Half a year after the attack, Luca would discover a new hobby. He realized that upon killing flies that buzzed too close to him, he would grow exhilarated by the feeling of taking a life. The fact that an insect's fate depended entirely on his mood made him feel like he could do anything. He would move on to bigger targets such as spiders, butterflies, and beetles, and eventually even larger prey such as birds, rabbits, and dogs. The larger animals would resist, but Luca would enter a bloodlust and kill them regardless. He felt guilty upon seeing a disembodied rabbit leg for the first time, but the high he got from killing was too great.
I can't hear the blood in my ears now!
Luca would eventually learn of his mother's location in the town of Chiaro after eavesdropping on his new caretaker, and one night he snuck out to see her. When he found her, however, what he found was tragic. His mother was unkempt, scrawny, and unable to properly acknowledge her son. Luca ran out to grab her hands, but she shrieked and retreated when he did so, and refused to receive a bouquet of her favorite flowers. His former caretaker, Mariel, rushed into the room to check on the disturbance, and she told Luca that he shouldn't be here. She said that Sarah would recover soon enough, and let slip how much she hated the men who attacked the carriage that day, and that she wanted to kill them. These words resonated with Luca. That's right, those wretches. It's okay to kill them. They're better off dead. Luca tried to convince Mariel to let him stay there, but she refused and urged him to return to the castle. Having been rejected by the two people that he cared most about, Luca was shattered. He wandered the streets of Chiaro, dejected, until he came across a deserted house in the outskirts of town. He peeked inside to see if it might be a good place to spend the night, and overheard some voices coming from inside. He manages to make out the words Agares and Highland, which piqued his curiosity. The men inside were coincidentally discussing the attack on the carriage, and how they were sent to attack it by Daryl, the mayor of Muse, and they mention in more explicit detail what had happened to Sarah. Hearing this, Luca's bloodlust takes over and he bursts into the house and slaughters the men, enacting revenge for both himself and for Mariel. Discovering his bloodlust while killing insects and animals was the turning point for Luca, but this was the point of no return. The flame in his heart would never die out, and the world would appear differently from now on. He was now a murderer, and he liked that. The attack that Mayor Daryl had orchestrated had left Sarah pregnant, and she would give birth to a daughter, Julia, before dying shortly afterwards. Mariel, her caretaker and wet nurse, would sacrifice herself, although what exactly that means isn't really explained. Luca would despise Julia due to what she represented, but allowed her to live due to how much she reminded him of their mother. Daryl would be spared Luca's wrath, as he would pass away prior to the events of Suikoden 2 for unknown reasons. Fueled by hatred towards his father for being a coward, and towards Joustin for orchestrating the attack on the carriage, Luca would direct his bloodlust discovered from his hobbies in more productive ways. As an adult, he would take control over the Highland army and use his position of authority to wage war between Dunan and Highland. The game begins with the demise of the Unicorn Youth Brigade of the Highland Kingdom. Looking for an excuse to declare war on Joustin, Luca worked with the brigade's leader, Captain Raud, to orchestrate an attack on the brigade that they would then blame on Joustin. In the middle of the night, Luca's soldiers would set fire to the camp and lie in wait on the only escape path, waiting to slaughter anyone who tried to flee. Only 2 people would survive the attack, Suikoden 2's main protagonist, Ryo, and his best friend, Jowie. Luca's soldiers chased them to a nearby waterfall, where they would escape by jumping down it and washing up downstream. Luca would lie about who was behind this attack to stir up the people of Highland to support his desired war on Joustin. Next, Luca would go on to sack and conquer the eastern part of Dunan in order to give him an advantageous position to take on the city of Muse. He razes Toto village to the ground, killing the parents of the family that took Jowie in after the attack, leaving their daughter Pilica orphaned, and she would later play an important role in Jowie's character development. Next on Luca's radar was Ryubei village. Ryo narrowly avoids this attack and witnesses the horrors from the nearby forest. This is where we get our first look at Luca's true personality in the game. He lines the villagers up to be slaughtered, and when making it to the front of the line, one woman begins pleading for her life. Luca sees an opportunity to have some fun and tells the woman to crawl on the ground and act like a pig, promising to let her live. She obeys as it's the only thing she can really do, but in the end Luca cuts her down anyway in his infamous scene. Die, pig! Finally, he sets his sights on Mercenary Fortress, Victor and Flick's stronghold, and Ryo and Jowie's new home. Despite the mercenary army having the advantage of fire spears, they are absolutely no match for the Highland army. Highland overwhelms the fort, and while escaping, Jowie and Ryo realize that Pilica is still trapped inside and rush back to save her. They find her in the meeting room on the 2nd floor, alongside Pol, another boy in the mercenary army, and Luca himself. Luca cuts down Pol before turning to Pilica and raising his sword against her. Jowie and Ryo rush in to block his attack and protect her, and Luca lectures them about the way of the world. Strong men like him are meant to take everything while the weak men die. He brags about his kill count and the ease with which he can take a life, before raising his sword to slaughter Jowie and Ryo. Victor and Flick rescue them before Luca is able to kill them, and set off an explosion to distract Luca long enough for them to escape. Luca's next target is Muse City, where Jowie and Rio have ended up after all this chaos. The mayor of Muse and daughter of Daryl, Annabelle, sends Rio and Jowie on a mission to infiltrate the Highland army camp in order to learn how many provisions Highland has stockpiled to know what Luca's strategy was. Fortunately for Luca, Raud was stationed at this camp, and so he was able to recognize Rio and Jowie through their disguises. The two of them hide out in Jilia's tent, where she is convinced to cover for them, as she doesn't quite fully agree with Luca's war. She says that Luca is trying to expand the war, despite the people of Highland growing tired of it. She views Luca as truly evil, and fears that she doesn't have the power to get him to back down anymore. Jowie and Rio are noticed as they try to flee the campsite, and Jowie offers to stay behind to distract the army while Rio gets away, promising they'll meet up again. Jowie is captured and manipulated by Luca into carrying out a task. Luca threatens to brand the Atreides royal family as traitors to Highland, unless Jowie assassinates Mayor Annabelle. Jowie does so, which allows Highland to take advantage of the confusion and send in the army to take control over Muse. With Muse under his control, Luca locks down the region by placing guards at all of the checkpoints leading out of the region and ordering Coronet Town's port to be shut down. Rio manages to flee Muse and somehow secure a boat leading out of Coronet and sets up shop in North Window alongside Victor and Flick, where they draw the attention of Luca once again. Luca sends his general Solon G into the South Window Principality to take over the city of South Window and the head of its mayor, Grand Mayor. Solon G next turns his eyes to North Window and launches an attack. But due to some clever strategizing by the newly recruited Shu, Rio and the newly formed New State Army are able to drive him back. Luca is disappointed with Solon G's performance and orders his guards to cut off his worthless head. Luca would then send the Highland army under the command of Kiba and Klaus over to Two River City, where they would fail to take over the city. No execution for them, though. Before turning his eyes over to Green Hill. Jowie volunteers to take command of the invasion, asking for only 5,000 soldiers to accomplish the task. Luca allows Jowie the opportunity to prove his worth, and even offers to reward him handsomely should he succeed, but warns him that failure would give him the same fate as Solon G. By the time Rio arrives at Green Hill, it had already fallen to the Highland army. Jowie's plan of attack was simply not to attack. He freed the prisoners taken from Muse, returned their weapons, and handed them over to Green Hill, laid siege to the city, and just waited. With all the extra soldiers to feed, Green Hill's food supply quickly ran low, and once it did, Jowie finally invaded the city where it gave up without a fight. Part of Luca's goal in Green Hill was to capture its mayor, Teresa, and Jowie and Raud announce a bounty of 20,000 poch for anyone who turned her in alive. Rio manages to smuggle Teresa out of Green Hill, but Jowie is still praised by Luca for his cleverness and is offered a reward for his efforts as promised. Jowie asks to have Luca's sister, Jilia, as his wife. Luca laughs at the balls on Jowie, and jokes about cutting off his head then and there. Jowie intrigues Luca by saying he has an idea, but not one that he can speak of in front of others, and they agree to meet up later to discuss it, with the threat of losing his head if Luca didn't like the idea. Jowie had learned of Luca's disdain for his father Agares, and offered to use his and Jilia's marriage as a means to kill the king. Agares was known to be a careful man, and Luca notes that he didn't even take a sip of water without having it tasted first, but Jowie would come up with a clever plan, one that would surely work against a Sicilian when death is on the line. In a ceremony known as the Wine of Fealty, to swear in a knight under the king, the wine is first tasted by a third party to test for poison, and then the soon-to-be knight pours some of their blood into the wine, which is then drunk by the king to symbolically accept the knight's loyalty. Jowie would ingest poison prior to the ceremony, as well as an antitoxin to allow him to survive. The act of pouring his blood into the wine would sneak poison into a drink that had already been tasted, making Agaras feel safe in drinking it. Why only the poison made its way into the wine and not the antitoxin? While everyone else was off finding help for the king, Luca would laugh at his demise, and finally confess to his father the hatred he had built up over the years. Still mad at him for abandoning Luca and his mother in that fateful moment, leaving them to be dishonored while he fled to safety, Luca sentences his father to death before shifting gears to his next goal, to cleanse the world of the unclean ones. Giulia runs in to mourn Agaras, but Luca asks why she's crying, as he wasn't even her real father. Hyland's next action is to pursue some refugees fleeing from Muse towards the Matilda border. Lord Gorodo of Matilda refuses to involve his troops in rescuing the refugees, and so Luca and his army are able to capture and slaughter them. One of Gorodo's knights, Miklotov, is dissatisfied by Gorodo's inaction and wants to travel to Muse himself to see with his own eyes what Hyland is doing with their occupation. Rio intercepts him on his way and joins him in traveling to Muse. Upon arriving at the city, they discover something particularly bizarre. A lot of magical energy seems to be congregating above the city and takes the form of a gigantic spectral wolf. Entering the city reveals no signs of life anywhere, until they head over to Joustin Hill where they find a single man being chased by some Highland soldiers, who reveals the horrors that had been unleashed upon the city. Hyland had sacrificed the people of Muse in a ritual to awaken the Beast Rune, one of the 27 true runes that had been lying dormant in Le Renouille. Luca admits to Jowie that he feels there are some segments of the Highland army that are disloyal to him, particularly Kiba and Klaus, who he feels were more loyal to Agaras than they were to him. Luca worries that this disloyalty could risk his entire strategy, but Jowie reveals an ace up his sleeve. He had recruited a master strategist, Leon Silverberg, to help ensure their victory. Hyland continues to expand its oppression south by taking over Radat and applying Highland law to anyone who steps out of line. Rio and the New State Army lay siege to Radat to try and free it, but Kiba's forces are able to hold them back for now. A repeat attack goes better for the New State Army, as they are able to capture Kiba and Klaus, while a cowardly Raud stays back from the front lines long enough to receive an order from Luca to retreat. Back at North Window, Shu and Rio attempt to convince Kiba and Klaus to join the New State Army, but have no luck until a messenger arrives. King Luca sends you this present in honor of your bravery. We look forward to the next battle. Signed, Leon Silverberg. Klaus notices a key detail in this message, King Luca, and surmises that he must have killed Agaras. Luca was correct earlier in that Kiba and Klaus's true loyalty was to Agaras and not to him, and so they finally decided to defect over to the New State Army. As Rio travels to Gregminster to seek out extra aid for the war, Luca returns from Le Renouille and mobilizes the Highland army towards North Window. Marching 50,000 troops strong, he is accompanied by the 1st Company under his command, the 3rd Company under Jowie's command, and the 4th Company, consisting of Kiba's former troops as well as reinforcements from Harmonia. The New State Army is outnumbered 2.5 to 1, with only 20,000 soldiers behind them, and Kiba notes that it feels like Luca wants to end the war in one decisive blow. Leon suggests that Luca's best plan of action would be to capture South Window and Radat, putting a stranglehold on North Window, but Luca shuts down this idea and instead insists on directly attacking the castle at North Window, striking at the heart to destroy their headquarters. Ignore the fact that the next two things Hyland captures are Radat and South Window. The New State Army sends Lord Ridley on a scouting mission to spy on the Highland Army, but his unit is surrounded and he is taken prisoner by Luca. Luca taunts him in captivity, but Ridley is too proud to break, so Luca dismisses him, claiming that he'll have both Ridley and Rio's heads soon enough. Shu recognizes just how disadvantaged the new state army is, and how they have absolutely no chance in a straight-up fight, and so he proposes a similar strategy to Luca. Strike at the heart and the rest will crumble. He wants Kiba's unit to attack Luca's unit, freeing Ridley and personally attacking Luca Blight. He would then feign a retreat and lure Luca into an ambush where they could surround him, isolating him from the rest of his 50,000 soldiers. Initially, this plan seems to succeed. Luca chases Kiba the deserter in the ambush, but things start to go south from here. Despite having the element of surprise, Luca is simply too powerful and manages to get away while injuring the entire New State army. I'm not exactly sure the mechanism of what's going on here. He just kinda disappears and hurts everyone. Maybe the HD remaster will clarify what's going on. Both sides withdraw, and the New State army regroups at North Window to lament the failure of their only plan. Despite the rest of the plan failing, however, Chaco is still able to rescue Lord Ridley, although it seems he did get some extra help from an unexpected source. Ridley brings with him a message for Shu from Leon Silverberg. Tonight, Luca Blight will lead a night raid. This will probably be our last chance. Deploy all the troops, lay an ambush for Luca Blight, and kill him. True to Leon's word, Luca tries to launch a night raid on North Window, and this time, the New State army is fully prepared. Both Luca's front and rear guard report that the enemy has gotten the jump on them. While Luca berates them for being unable to do their jobs correctly, the New State army's first squad, led by Flick, lets loose several volleys of arrow at Luca's unit, even landing some in Luca himself. Luca and his soldiers engage this first squad for a while, and after a time, Luca retreats, only to be met by a second squad, led by Victor. Again, they engage Luca in combat until he retreats again, where he's engaged by a third squad, led by Rio. On the brink of defeat, he retreats one last time. His soldiers throw themselves in the way to try and stop Rio from giving chase, but this only works to slow him down. At the cliff's edge, Luca comes across a wooden amulet lodged inside a tree that has a mysterious light coming from it. Opening the amulet to discover the source of the light releases a bunch of fireflies into the air, indicating to some nearby archer that Luca has been funneled there, and they riddle him with arrows. Luca's soldiers continue to throw themselves between him and the New State army, but the archers dispatch them, leaving Luca all alone. Still refusing to die, Luca charges at Rio, challenging him to one final duel. After 2 hails of arrows, 3 full-on battles, and a duel, Luca finally runs out of energy and is unable to even swing his sword. So that's it. We've defeated the big bad evil guy. Game's over, right? With their leader dead, the Highland army surrenders to the New State army, and we simply just patch up the damage that Luca has done to the world? Well... Before he dies, Luca questions Rio's motives and tells him that his ambitions to end the war are nothing more than a fairy tale. Highland won't simply abandon their pride and bow down to the victors, and there will be a nation screaming for vengeance at the loss of their king. In his final moments, Luca fully succumbs to his madness and starts laughing at the effort all of this took. It took hundreds to kill him, but he killed humans by the thousands. His final words are spent asking those present to look at his face and observe the true face of evil, before he collapses to the ground permanently. And Luca was right. His death, unfortunately, does not end the war. The tension between Highland and the rest of Joustin still remains. Jowie refuses to make peace. Lucia of the Karaya clan has unresolved business with Greenhill. Gorodo has Matilda submit to Highland, and we will never forgive him for what he tried to do to Nanami. You did recruit all 108 Stars of Destiny, right? And the Beast Rune has still been awoken from its slumber. And I guess we still have to deal with Necklord for the third time, but that's a little bit less relevant to the war at hand. Before we discuss Luca's personality, I want to quickly go over one major detail that I see repeated everywhere. It's in random Reddit comments, wikis, TV tropes, but according to the official short story Crisis Point, it's just not true. I don't know where it started, but it feels like a giant game of broken telephone, and I just wanted to get this out of the way first and foremost. Going by official lore, Luca does not see what happens to his mother during the attack on the carriage. He heard some screams, but even once his father told him that his mother was soiled, it wasn't until he overheard a conversation between the bandits in Chiaro Town when he was finally able to piece things together. With that out of the way, however, let's carry on. Luca Blight is incredibly one-dimensional, but he takes that singular dimension to its absolute limit that he still manages to be an interesting villain. He's unhinged and only wants destruction, and to satisfy the bloodlust that he discovered as a teenager. He doesn't care what remains of the world once he's done with it, he just wants to pass on his pain and suffering to everyone else, particularly those he feels are responsible for the loss of his mother as he knew her. The game is crystal clear from the start that he's a complete lunatic, and that doesn't let up, even once we hit his final moments. There are two moments early on in the game that do a great job of conveying this, in my opinion. The attack on Ryubei Village and the attack on Mercenary Headquarters. Ryubei shows us how truly deranged he is, and Mercenary Fortress shows us the extent that Luca is willing to go. He has nothing to gain from degrading the woman. He's killing everyone in the village, so it's not like he's sending a message to his enemies, he's just doing it for fun. And that's why this scene is so fascinating to me and many others. The fact that there's no tangible benefits to his behavior really drives the point home that Luca is a maniac who needs to be stopped. And his actions at the Mercenary Fortress show us that nobody, not even a child, is immune to his wrath if they piss him off. All Pilica does is cry as Luca murders Pol, which ruins his fun, and is enough to set him off and cause him to raise his sword against a child. There's a famous quote said by Lord Acton in a letter to Bishop Creighton. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. He talks about the frequent corruption of those in power, and how we tend to hold our leaders to different standards than everyone else. He mentions Francois Ravaillac, Queen Elizabeth I, and William III of England. He compares Ravaillac's crime of assassinating King Henry IV to the massacre of Glencoe under William III, and the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, ordered by Queen Elizabeth I. Ravaillac was tortured and executed, while the other two faced no consequences for simply being a leader rather than a man of no position. The point Acton was making wasn't necessarily that power corrupts on its own, but rather that those in power lack the checks and balances that the rest of us have to negatively reinforce bad behaviors. I found this Reddit post from 9 years ago talking about Acton's quote and how it may or may not apply to the Dune series, and while I know nothing of Dune itself, some interesting points were brought up. The simple psychology is this: if we do something that other people don't like, they react negatively to that action, causing us to stop doing that. Whereas if we do something that people do like, they react positively, giving us incentive to keep doing whatever it was we just did. And the problem is, when you hold power, the reactions of those around you fundamentally change, often skewing away from these negative reactions.
Sir, I'm afraid you've gone mad with power.
Of course I have. You ever tried going mad without power? It's boring. No one listens to you.
Sometimes you have someone like Raud, sucking up to leadership because they stand to gain something from it. Raud is dissatisfied with his position leading the Unicorn Brigade, and sees Luca's plans as an opportunity to make advancements for himself. Killing Jowie and Rio is simply a necessary evil that he has to go along with in order to escape his current situation. Alternatively, people might simply be afraid of the backlash that could come as a result of speaking against those in power. Solon G, while he wasn't executed for talking back, was still an example set by Luca, that a failure to stay in line and please him would have dire consequences. The only person I can remember from all of Highland who challenges Luca in the slightest is Jowie, and even he does so at the threat of losing his head like Solon should he disappoint. To be clear, Luca was always going to end up deranged, with or without power. Crisis Point, and you have no idea how many times I almost typed out Crisis Core while writing this script, spells out in no uncertain terms that Luca had gone off the deep end well before he ever held any form of power. But power elevated his ability to demonstrate his madness to the world, and removed any pushback that he might have otherwise gotten, allowing him to further spiral into his madness. I'd like to be able to better analyze Luca from Crisis Point, but it's a bit of a difficult situation to digest. Obviously, the incident was very traumatic for him and greatly affected the trajectory of his life, but I have no way to put myself into his shoes like that, and I took chemical engineering rather than psychology at university, so I don't quite have the background to properly evaluate what he went through, so my assessment's going to be from more of a layman's perspective. I think it's difficult to point to any one factor at play and place all of the blame on it, as to me it really seems like an extreme combination of circumstances. Luca discovered the thrill of killing completely separately from the other major incidents at the time, but perhaps the circumstances he was in were what caused him to notice the rush that he got. Perhaps he had some sort of predisposition for bloodlust. Or maybe he was looking for some form of emotion to fill the void left when Sarah and Mariel were taken from him, and killing the insect was the first time he felt like he had any agency in his life. Or maybe he would have been too busy to notice the high that came alongside killing were they still around. And there's also the scale of his bloodlust. What would have happened had he never come across his mother's assailants in Chiaro? Maybe he would have just stuck to animals as an outlet for his rage, as opposed to moving on to the most dangerous game, were it not for this fateful encounter. I think, given his position as Highland royalty, he would have eventually discovered the thrill of taking a human life, as he would have inevitably been given control over the army, so that feels like a bit of a moot point, but perhaps the significance of who he killed played a notable role. These weren't random people that he killed, they were men who had severely wronged him, and it was probably extremely cathartic for him, which helped to cement the experience as a positive one in his mind. And maybe killing random enemies of the state in a war wouldn't have given him that same feeling. The writers have said that Luca doesn't use any runes himself, and so all of his strength is just raw muscle shining through. When he hits hard as hell during his boss fight, those hits aren't enhanced by anything, he's just simply that strong. And speaking of his boss fight, it's an excellent example of how gameplay can be used to drive a narrative point. The game doesn't just tell us he's strong as hell using words, it has him injured narratively, then take on 3 full parties of 6, get injured again, and still remain standing for a duel against Rio. That's 4 full phases of boss fight on top of him being injured twice in the story, and only one of those phases feels gimmicky or easy. Can't list a ton of JRPGs with multi-phase boss fights like this. Maybe it's because they're harder to do well without feeling gimmicky, but this boss fight stands out to me in that it works so well both narratively and mechanically. Or at least as mechanically well as duels can feel. It took hundreds to kill me, but I killed humans by the thousands. This line really drives the point home of just how powerful he is. We just mentioned what it took to kill him, but that was just the fight itself. It was nothing short of a miracle to even get to that point. Shu gives us the best strategy that he has, and it even works. We lure Luca into our trap successfully, we just can't beat him. It took the betrayal of some of Luca's most trusted men, revealing his exact plan to us, and he still manages to put up an excellent fight despite the odds. And again, he doesn't need the aid of runes to be this powerful. He's just jacked as hell, wears the freshest clothes, eats at the chillest restaurants, and hangs out with the hottest dudes. He sacrifices the lives of many to fuel the beast rune, but this is just an end goal for him, not a means of achieving anything. Back to the quote, in his last moments, he's not begging for his life. He's not cursing the new state army as they're killing him. He's just continuing to sow chaos, bragging about his KD ratio and how the war will continue even after his death. Too many catalysts had been set in motion and trust had been too damaged for things to settle down. In the aftermath of his death, Jowie marries Jillia and becomes the new king of Highland. And because the world is complicated, he can't simply make peace between Highland and the new state army, so he threatens us, trying to have us surrender unconditionally. He allies with a new player in the war, Lucia, who tries to assassinate Ryo a couple of times, and even has the audacity to tell us that our death is worth it because it'd bring the war to an end. There's Gorudo's stubbornness and his willingness to kill both Ryo and Jowie. And then there's still the matter of the Beast Rune. It had been awakened and unleashed upon the world, and Leon would rather see it fully empowered than surrender to the new state army. In terms of symbolism, I'm not sure there's a ton to be had. Luca is a common enough name, and looking through Wikipedia's list of notable Lucas, none of them appear to be dictators or warlords or anything of the sort. And of the listed fictional Lucas, Luca Blight is the first to appear as a major antagonist of any sorts. The name may derive from the Latin name Lucus, meaning bringer of light, and this meaning somewhat fits with his outfit, with his white and blue motifs perhaps being more fitting of a paladin. His name and outfit work together to provide a juxtaposition with their symbolism and Luca's behavior and actions. His last name, Blight, is a bit more straightforward, meaning disease or detriment, and Shu even makes a reference to his name when he says, Luca Blight has been a blight on this land. Now, this game notably didn't get the greatest translation, and I wanted to get this video out right around the release of the HD remaster, which may update the translation, so there could be some contradictions between what I say and the remaster's script. If any major details are changed or something gets clarified, I'll be sure to edit that into the pinned comment.